everybody. Thank you for joining me. Today, I am going to be talking about computer science across the curriculum in action. And this is the second presentation in this series. My name is Holly Graffam, and I work for the Department of Education as an MLTI ambassador. And I have included my contact information. There will be a PDF in the description section of this video, and you'll be able to get links to everything that I am presenting today in that PDF. So last time I talked about the importance of why we needed to integrate computer science across the curriculum, and I gave a few easy ways around that you could be integrating computer science. I talked about computational thinking and using vocabulary as a way to make connections. But today I'm going to kind of dive into very specific examples of how you might incorporate computer science within your curriculum. And you may not be able, each of these situations may or may not be applicable to you, but hopefully they are, if you don't want to use them specifically, that they provide some inspiration. And this is not an exhaustive list of examples, but just some ways, again, to hopefully inspire you to see that there are many, many ways that you can incorporate computer science in the existing curriculums that you're already doing in your classroom. And I decided to break this presentation up by some of the big buckets in the K-12 computer science framework. And although I'm not going to be touching each one of those sort of concepts that they break into, I am going to talk about quite a few of them. And these are not unplugged activities. So, excuse me, next week's video will be about unplugged activities that you can do with computer science. So I started off with algorithms and programming. And while I'm not here to really promote a computer science curriculum per se, but I am pretty excited about this CS First, which is Google's Scratch-based curriculum designed to integrate content curriculum with programming. I feel that it's not a complete program, but it has many different entry points. So there are different levels of difficulty. The ones that I'm talking about here with the ELA, those are only like what they say are 2 lessons or 2 sessions, about 45 minutes or so each. So the time commitment varies depending on how extensive you are doing this. And they have a lesson plan, they have tutorials and examples, so it's pretty well laid out for teachers and pretty accessible. Some of the ones that I liked were there's a great ELA connections with characterization, storytelling, dialogue, figurative language, and narration. And the storytelling really can be interdisciplinary, right? Because it's talking about narrating a story, but it could be any story about explaining what your learning is. There's some music and there's some art ones in there as well. I recommend, if your students are not familiar with Scratch, that they do have an introductory lesson that has 4 or 5 different lessons within it that just introduces Scratch to students. And if you're not familiar with Scratch, Scratch is a web-based block programming that has been created by MIT, and it's open source, kids find it very engaging, very accessible. And there's lots of Scratch tutorials out there. So if you're not familiar with Scratch, or your students are, I recommend doing the Welcome to CS first lesson, and that really is about getting familiarized with Scratch. So that's one. And I'm going to bring back my microbits. I did a whole presentation on microbits, and so I recognize that you may or may not have accessibility to the physical microbits, but it really was worth talking about here. You can get a classroom set of microbits for about $650 to $700, the initial investment is huge, but I'm going to show you how you could use these in multiple classes. So if you could even think about, it's not just for science or not just for math, but maybe if you could get a team to come together and pool their money to get a class set of microbits, that might make it more feasible for you. Some of the ones that I really liked, and I've linked them here. Some have videos, some are just linked in, but there is the self-watering planter where the microbit detects the dryness in the soil, sends a message to a motor to then water the plants. Pretty cool. This is by a math teacher that he talks about using the microbits to create math manipulatives. Um, a lot of science curriculums use the Rube Goldberg machines or reaction machines, whatever you want to call them, but you could really tech it up by including some of the things that the microbits can do with sensors and lights and buzzers and sound. So here is just a little example of what somebody did with that, is an inspiration. And then an interactive art prototype. So in my microbit session, and I've actually talked about this in the novel engineering section as well, is about doing an interactive art piece. Is one way that students could demonstrate their learning. In the novel engineering example I used in A Long Walk to Water, one of the options that students had on their choice board was to create an interactive art experience that helped talk about water scarcity. And so this is just a simple interactive art experience, but it could be a prototype. It could be an inspiration for another project. So if you want to look back at the novel engineering, which is in my problem-based learning series, and the microbits presentation is also in that series, go ahead and you can kind of go back and get some more specifics around these. And I've actually linked my video for the microbits and physical computing right here. Now this is a math option that you could use, and this is programming Cartesian planes. So the sprites in Scratch are based on a Cartesian plane. So where the sprite is on the stage has an XY coordinate. So you could bring that in to talk about that with students. And I've given you a little tutorial here. The microbits, and in this case, you wouldn't necessarily have to have the physical microbit. You could, excuse me, you could make these programs and run them on the simulator. So I've given you a little video about the XY coordinates, and this is a little bit different how they use XY coordinates, but a good lesson. And then finally, the Meet Edison. So I wanted to bring in some robotics in here as well. And so Edison is a pretty affordable robot. You could get a classroom set of about 15 robots with a repair kit and a kit they call Ed Creations, which just has a bunch of different components that you can add to the robot. And this one, also the top of this is Lego compatible. So you could get a robot, a classroom set for about $750, which if in robotics land, that is probably less than what it would cost to get one, say, Lego Vex robot. So the Edison robots are a really affordable way to introduce students to programming and robotics. And not only that, but the Edisons use Scratch. So if your kids already know how to use Scratch, you can use the Scratch based program for your Edison. And this one just talks about like you could create a Edison has line tracking, so you can take black electrical tape and make anything that you want. So kids could create a Cartesian plane and then mark out where Edison goes so that he lands on a specific XY coordinate. Again, so I wanted Scratch is online free. This one you could actually use the physical or the simulator, and this one you would need to have the Edison robots. Again, the Edison robots could be used not just, this just happened to be a math example, but they could be used in multiple different ways. So that's kind of it for programming. Again, I said like that's not exhaustive. I just wanted to give you some examples. So now we're going to look at web pages. And web pages is a great way for students to demonstrate their learning or research for any content area. They could create a web page that had images, text, all of that. And it uses computer languages of HTML and CSS to add information and format the web page. If you want to go all in, Wix Education for those students that are 13 and older has a fantastic a curriculum that you can use that students are building these great web pages as they go along. You could use your content to help facilitate that. If you don't have students who are 13 and older, or you're looking for something that's not quite as intensive, Khan Academy has some great tutorials for HTML and CSS. And then I also included a link to an online open source text editor so they could and you can see I used this right here. So I actually went into Khan Academy and was practicing. They have a practice text editor that you can use, and it's tutorial based, and you get feedback based on whether or not you've entered things correctly. And so I was going through that, and then I copied some of that HTML coding, and I popped it into this text editor, and it created this web page that I was able to then display. So that is a great way to have kids create web pages, learn a little HTML and CSS, as well as demonstrate their learning. Data is probably the easiest way to integrate computer science into your existing curriculum. Data has a wide range of areas that we are going to talk about, and I will bring that back in just a minute. But practically every content area can use data. If you're thinking social studies, we look at charts and graphs and maps all the time, and how to, extract information from that. So that is data. In math, you are, again, charts and creating graphs and all of that based on data. Science, you're collecting data. So data is pretty easy to integrate across the curriculum, and I've got some unique ways here I'm going to talk about. So first of all, I went to a computer science across the curriculum uh, event, and I found out about Tom Lynch and his Plotting Points website. And it's pretty cool for those who are ELA teachers and are looking for, an opportunity to include computer science. So he has many, many books that he has created a database for each of these books. So he's taken every word within a particular novel and has um, created a database for those words. And so as a teacher, you go in, select a book, enter in, you can enter up to 4 keywords, and it creates a graph for you based specifically on that book. So the model lessons that our group did, which I thought was so interesting, and I think you would really enjoy doing it in your classroom, is that the teacher goes in and creates a graph with up to 4 keywords. And so I put in 4 keywords. I'm not going to quite tell you what the book is yet or what they mean. And it generated this graph. And so from there, students make observation, and down here's the frequency of when the word was used, and it's broken out into each chapter. And so from here, students start making observations. Chapter 20, whatever this word was used a lot, 60 times. And then you just, again, this is talking about making observations versus inferences and hypotheses and questions. So you have them go through, make 4 or 5 or 2 or 3 different observations based on the graph. Then you go back and say, okay, now based on these observations, what are some questions that you might have? Or what are some hypotheses, or what are some predictions that you're going to make? And so you kind of go through this process of looking at this graph a couple different times without students still don't know what the novel is, still don't know what these words are. And I've linked his reader's guide right here, and he gives you instructions and writes out the whole lesson plan. So I'm going to show you what this actually was the giver, and I put in 4 character names, and we can see how that worked out. So this is a great ELA way to use data in your classroom, and by extension, you're using some computer science. The microbits again. Now, I talked about using them before in programming because you would be programming the microbits, but I wanted to also bring it in here because now you're collecting environmental data, and based on that environmental data, the program is going to do something. And this, I've linked into these different, if you click on here, it will bring you to the web page that has videos for all of this, of the data collection piece, and some different sensors that are built into the microbit and how you might use those. And a really cool one was saving the turtles. And to not go into it too much, but turtles are affected by light. And so you use the light sensor and you kind of create this whole thing about saving the turtles. So again, bringing in the microbits for a different means here. And you can see, like, this is the muscle sensor. So you might even make some health connections in here as well. Now, You could just do a data project. And this is really something that could, again, be integrated in pretty much any content area. And the four big parts of data in computer science is about collection. And it's collecting data. Typically, it's not about you maybe putting information in a spreadsheet, but it's how do we automate it, automatically collect data. So if you create a Google form and people are entering information into that form, it automatically collects that data and starts sorting it to the where you can start making charts and graphs. So it could be students can easily make forms. They could be digital surveys. It might be where they enter in observational data or experimental data. And from here, this form very easily generates a spreadsheet. Uh, if you are doing this data project and maybe what you want students to do is to compare this data to larger sets of data. So I have one group that is working on internet connectivity, and so they want to look at this connectivity across the state, across New England, across the country, like larger data sets. So you might want to make sure that that larger data set is readily available to you and your students before you start deciding what data you want to collect. But that's only if you want to compare it to a larger data set. Um, Students then merge their data, which again is the automation of how we collect data in computer science. Then they through that, then they can look at their data and they analyze it and they make observations, comparisons, predictions, conclusions, and they create visualizations of their data through pictorials or infographics. This is kind of just a generic looking type of thing. In the pictorials could be an infographics, or some of those things where you might have. So say you've broken things up in um, by grade level. And so you might have a symbol that represents each grade level. Uh, and So maybe it's red people are eighth grade and blue people are seventh grade and yellow people are pink people are sixth grade, and it's percentages. And so the number of people you have represents the percentage. So those are kind of the pictorials and infographics that students can create. They could create, like we're seeing here, just your common charts and graphs, which are super easy to create out of spreadsheets. Not quite as creative, maybe, or sometimes it's not as visually interesting as pictorials and infographics, but that's one other thing. Or another really cool thing you could do is you could create physical three-dimensional representations, right? So maybe out of Legos, you have, you can have 10 Legos that represent 100% something. I'm just being really kind of generic and like three label, so then you could take your percentages based on your data and really make kind of this physical three-dimensional representation of your data. And so that can really be done through almost any content area. And this has got and is super interdisciplinary, right? Because students are going to create forms, which means they're going to do a lot of writing and thinking about the precision and what it is that they want, based on what they want to get for data, what they want to collect is going to determine how they write their questions. And so there's a lot of, there's some ELA pieces in there. Looking at creating charts and graphs and looking at the numbers and making predictions and all of that is science and math, right? And the data could be about again, I would say that, learning how to create charts and graphs and reading charts and graphs is a very common social studies things. We often look at charts and graphs in our social studies content areas and ask students to make inferences and observations and predictions based on those. So this can be a super interdisciplinary project that could be done pretty much in any content area. And this is just a quick little sample of how you might do a data project. Um, just inspiration for you. And I've also included lots and lots of data resources. So here's some access to a bunch of different data sets, some visualization tools, some things that might help you if you decide to create like a data project. Then finally, I'm going to talk about the impacts of computing. And this would be, so we might start talking about, so the impacts of computing are, what are the ethics, cultural, global impacts that we have to think about and consider as as computer science continues to expand and explode across uh, across the globe as far as what we are using. So artificial intelligence is another big area of computer science, and with that can go a lot of ethics. And so I think this you could have a great conversation, really in any class, but I can kind of see like social studies talking about current events and what are some of the ethics and challenges around artificial intelligence, deep fakes, all of those things. It could be a great digital citizenship lesson. So, with that, and I've mentioned this before in a previous problem solving uh, video. But this is how to train your robot, and this is brought to us by the people at MIT. And this is using Microbits, but it is all about artificial intelligence and the ethics of all that. MIT has several. This is just an image, but if you go to this link about AI literacy and again, really talking about the ethics and the implications of artificial intelligence. And MIT also has this great thing called an app inventor. So these people are it's the same group that really brought us Scratch. And so they also created this open source app inventor. And they have this great activity that you can do with that. And does not have to be 13 and over. I think that that you can use this with younger grades as well. And then there are some cultural connections, and I found this virtual bead loom. And if you go to this has a pretty well detailed little lesson plan that you can follow, and it talks about the cultural pieces, specifically around Native Americans and their traditional beadwork. And then it has a virtual loom, and so students can then use some programming pieces to create their own beadwork. Uh, and lastly, I want to talk about Moose. And for those of you that are not familiar with the Moose project, but stands for Maine's Online Opportunities for Sustained Education. And this really was born out of the last couple of years where we've done a lot of distance learning. And this year, we've had some focus modules and on computer science, really computational thinking and computer science. And this fall, the modules really looked at computational thinking and programming. And then this summer, there'll be another group of modules that will be available, and they are focusing on data. So if you chose to do the data one, there's some really great modules out there that you might inspire you, or you might just be able to take it as a ready-made unit. And these are created by Maine teachers and who are in the field right now in the classroom. And so these are, again, open source for any teacher to be able to go online and access these and integrate them in your classroom. So two that I've highlighted, and this is a middle school module on what does it take to survive in the outdoors of Maine. And it talks, now the computer science is a little bit more subtle, if you will. So they're really talking about, this one focuses on algorithms and those types of parts, a lot of computational thinking in this one. And then making a point with data. How can I visualize data to shape understanding? And this has a lot of art connections in it. And some ways that students collected data and turned that into artwork. So both of these are great. And if you are interested in looking at those or any of the other Moose modules out there, and I've linked to, here's some other computer science ones, and you can get in to look at those. So some other resources I wanted to share with you, climate, these are a little bit more content specific. So climate champions, that I've kind of talked about the different computer science connections, and that is computational thinking, engineering design, and data. Could be science, could be social studies, integrating computer science and music. This is engineering design and programming. This is really interesting, creating music using some programming. Ozobots, which are another type of robotics. These are a little bit more expensive than the Edisons, but if you have access to some, you might find some interesting things here. Agricultural and robots. And this to me is, because agricultural is a huge slice of what we do here in Maine as far as the economy, and really looking at how do robots and agriculture intersect. And so that had some great computer science connections that I thought were very relevant to many of our students here in Maine. And then finally, Bootstrap Algebra. And this is an algebra curriculum that combines mathematical concepts and program. It's a pretty rigorous curriculum, but if you are teaching math algebra at the middle school level and you really want to have this be kind of a a pretty extensive computer science programming component to it, Bootstrap Algebra is something that you might want to look at. And you could use it as your whole curriculum, but I think they're also, they talk about ways that you might just use parts of it, or or kind of little bits of it, if you will, into your algebra program. So thank you for spending some time with me. I hope that these gave you some inspiration of how computer science can be integrated into your curriculums. Again, this is just a few ways. And if you want to get some contact hours for watching this, just click on the link here. There's a little form to fill out, and that will send you a certificate of contact hours. Again, this is all in the description underneath the video. So thank you and have a great day.